Our next speaker, when I read through his bio, it's a reintroduction for some of you who had the benefit of meeting with him this fall in Cleveland, and an introduction for others. Mark Shapiro is from the class of 1985 in Gilman, and he's the president of the Cleveland Indians baseball team. Following Gilman, he attended Princeton University, where he earned a degree in history. And while there, Mr. Shapiro played 4 years of football for the Tigers. Following graduation, he worked in the real estate development industry in Southern California before starting his work in Major League Baseball. In 1992, Mr. Shapiro began his 24-year career with the Cleveland Indians as an assistant in baseball operations. Following this, he spent 5 seasons as the tribe's director of minor league operations, overseeing aspects of the club's player development system and Latin American operations. Next, he served for 3 years as the vice president of baseball operations and assistant general manager, followed by 9 years as the executive vice president and general manager. Since 2010, he's been the president of the Cleveland Indians. And as such, he oversees the baseball and business operations departments. He recently guided the organization through a series of moves to shape and clarify its strategic vision, brand, and customer service philosophies. In addition to his work with the Indians, Mr. Shapiro has served on several commissioner-appointed Major League Baseball committees. He lives with his family in Bentleyville, Ohio, and is an active member of the community, assisting with service work and charitable efforts. So please join me in also welcoming back to Gilman, Mr. Mark Shapiro.
Thank you, Mr. Smythe. Well, I have to say, first, Tronster, those were great remarks. I think there's a lot of similarities and themes. You can contrast gamer and sports guy, and it's easy to say we had very different paths, but there are going to be a lot of similar themes. You just have a much cooler name. So that was a great talk. It is truly an honor for me to be here today. As I reflect back before coming here, we talked a little bit about acknowledging Mr. Finney in the back of the room, sitting next to Mr. Bristow. There may not be two men other than my dad who maybe had more of an influence on the man I am today, and the group of teachers, coaches on the field and in the classrooms that committed to people's development, not just formative education, but character, emotional development, intellectual development. It's humbling for me to be asked to be here today, mostly because of the dedication that people like Mr. Kumar and Dr. Thornberry and the people that committed to my classmates and my development. So it is an honor to be here. It's also a little bit humbling and daunting because I remember sitting right there, and I remember fighting head nods sitting in that chair, and I remember the thoughts as I filed in here, thinking, really? Another one of these things I got to sit through? So, I start today with the challenge of I'm not going to let you drift off in that same seat I drifted off in, and hopefully leave you with a few thoughts and lessons that will run parallel to some of Tronster's and maybe take it in a little bit of a direction as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about my start in Major League Baseball, some of the lessons and thoughts you can get from that, a few of the characteristics and attributes and traits I've seen in high-level performers, both in the classroom, on the field, and in the offices. And then maybe if we have time for Q&A, any questions you've got from the perspective I've had to have around the game of baseball, whether it be league, team, or front office, I'd be happy to answer those as well. I graduated from Princeton with no idea what I wanted to do. I feel like some people that feel like they have a calling and know what they want to do with their lives are really fortunate. I was the classic liberal arts guy, history major, graduated with no real idea. And so I went out in the working world and I tried one job and then another job. And during that path, I went out to Arizona and visited my dad in spring training, who was representing players at that time. One of those former players is in the room, is the baseball coach here, Larry Sheets. And I visited with my dad, and I was 23 years old, right? So I met a bunch of front office executives and met these guys and said, hey, I want to do that job. why not? Run a baseball team. That sounds good. And I wrote 26, resumes and cover letters. I think I probably, believe it or not, I sent them in the mail, Tronster. That's hard to imagine doing these days. And I waited, and that big 0 that you put on the screen, that's pretty much what I got, back. 0 responses. And then, finally my roommate called me one day, hey, you got a letter here from a major league team. And I'm thinking, it's going to be the Orioles, right? Come on, I'm a Baltimore guy, or maybe it's the Braves are up and coming. I said, who's it from, man? Who's it from? He goes, it's from the Indians. Indians? Come on, I mean, this is like 1991. So the Indians, how many of you guys have seen the movie Major League? Anybody? That's almost as many as Tron. So the Indians at that point in 1991 were known for one thing, the movie Major League. They were the laughing stock of Major League Baseball, had lost more games that season than any other team in the entire league, and that was the only team that wanted to interview me. So what I do, I got on a plane, I flew into Cleveland, and I can tell you, for anybody that's made the drive in Cleveland from the airport to the old municipal stadium, it is not a Chamber of Commerce drive. It is smokestacks in the background, heavy industry, and as we're getting off the exit and we're pulling down the Ontario Street towards the stadium, the cab driver said, that's where the new stadium's going to be built. Some lady just got carjacked there the other day. And I'm thinking, I pull up to the old stadium, it's like a giant old building, and I go up some cramped stairs and find myself in John Hart's office. John Hart, general manager of one of 26 major league teams, the job I aspired to have, and no ceiling tiles. He's got a space heater by his desk, a plastic plant in the corner, and I'm thinking, sitting down thinking, this is the job I want to have? This guy's the general manager of a major league team? But within about 15 minutes, I was on the edge of my seat leaning in, and John was talking about his vision on how the Cleveland Indians would go from last to first place. He was talking about what it was like to work in that environment and that culture. When I landed back in New York City, there was a message on my old school answering machine from John Hart offering me a job. And I didn't blink. I didn't blink. I loaded up a U-Haul truck 2 months later with my little brother David, who also went here, and I drove shortly after Christmas Day from Cleveland to New York, and 24 years ago, I embarked on a career in Major League Baseball with the Cleveland Indians. That has ridden me through a lot of different jobs and a lot of different roles and a lot of ups and downs, but overall, an incredibly fulfilling and an incredibly happy and satisfying career. I think as I reflect back, I did 2 things that day, 2 things that I might not have been that aware of as a 23-year-old guy. One, I found opportunity in a distressed situation. Guys, I wanted the Orioles to be the team that called, I wanted the Braves or the Yankees, but sometimes if you look beyond the glamour, if you look beyond what you think other people might want you to be, what might think is an acceptable place to be, and you realize that sometimes great opportunity comes in those distressed situations. I was able to do a lot of meaningful work very quickly, and I was able to progress very quickly because it wasn't the hot spot to be. And the more important thing that I did was I bought into people and I bought into a culture that aligned with my values. When I listened to John Hart and I listened to Dan O'Dowd paint that vision of what we were going to be, I was like, I want to work for those guys. I want to wake up every day and go to work, go to war with those guys. And as opposed to my first 2 jobs where I went in and was like, I don't want to be my boss. I don't want their job. That's not something I aspire to do. They had created a culture that aligned with my values. So let me pull back on that for a second, because that's a pretty abstract concept for guys that are 15, 16, 17 years old. And it's a lot of hard work to do those things. But I'd urge you, as you move forward and complete your education, as you begin to think about careers, do that. Do the hard work to clarify your values. Think about, when am I happy? When am I fulfilled? When am I most at peace? Who are the people I'm around? What am I doing? Do the work to clarify your values. Because if you do that work, then you can look for leaders. You can look for cultures that align. And here's the great thing about that, and it may sound a little hollow coming from a guy that works in baseball every day, but when you do that, you may find out that a whole realm of jobs beyond what you originally think will make you happy will actually lead to you being happy and fulfilled. That sounds easy for me to say, coming from working in Major League Baseball, but I believe with every fiber of my body that if those first 2 jobs I had worked before I worked for the Indians had been in cultures I aligned with or leaders that invested in my development and believed in me, that I might still be in those industries today. So do that hard work to clarify your values. Think about those things. Understand who you are. And if you do that, I think fulfillment and success follow that alignment and that approach. Once I got in, I followed a lot of the things that Coach Bristow talked to me about when I was here. My dad talked to me every day. I had kind of two simple things. I just said, hey, everything I do, I'm going to do better and faster than my bosses expect. That was it, better and faster. Better meant that I had high standards for myself, that every single thing assigned to me, I wanted to exceed expectations. See, in my career, I've seen both players and staff people. There are two types. There are types that do the box, check the box. They complete a task. Nothing wrong with that. They do everything. They complete the task. And then there are those people who set high standards. They want to achieve excellence. They're never satisfied. And I set out that goal that at 24 years old, the quality of everything I did would be better than my bosses expected. And secondly, the sense of urgency. I wanted to get it back faster. I think that showed them that I was deeply committed, that I believed and committed to their vision, and that I cared deeply about the work I was doing. And that's one of those things for me that I look for when we hire people. Does someone really care? Is it important to them? Do they take pride in it? Is it meaningful? Those are some of the things that I committed to that led to me having various opportunities with the Indians. Some of the things I was exposed to over the past 25 years that I think would be valuable for you to think about are some of the traits and attributes that we talk about when we go to draft, trade for, sign players, or hire executives in offices. And there are things that I've seen that are highly analogous to every walk of life, whether it's teachers, executives, coaches, leaders, performers in the field. The same attributes, traits, and characteristics lead people to be successful. It's the parallels and the threads that, although very different subject matter, do create some synergy between what Tronster was talking about and what I'm going to talk about now. There's a lot of different things we look for, and I only have time to cover a few, so I'm just going to hit on one briefly and then one in depth. There's a guy named Pat Gillick who's a Hall of Fame front office executive. He actually spent 3 seasons here working for the Orioles, but he started the Blue Jay franchise. He led 2 different teams to world championships, won 3 world championships. My first year as general manager, 2002, I sat in a suite in Cleveland watching us play the Seattle Mariners he was with that time. And I asked Pat a simple question. I go, Pat, what do you look for in players? And Pat was very comfortable with silence, as a lot of really smart people are. He stood, let it hang for a few minutes, and he said, Mark, I look for dependable, reliable players. That's it. And at first I felt a little like that was a little short. I needed more than that, but I thought about that. And I thought about that driving home that night. And when I got out of my car the next day back at the ballpark, and I got to the parking lot, and I saw this car, this Bentley of a guy that we had traded for and signed to a multi-year contract, and I was like, and that was a guy who was a good guy, played hard, was a good teammate, cared a little, but I just didn't know how committed he was. And I started thinking, dependable, reliable players. That's it. That's very succinct, but he's talking about consistency. He's talking about controlling the controllable. Because the reality is, in the realm of a baseball player, in the realm of anything we do in life, there are going to be hundreds of things every day we can't control, right? For a player, he can't control the umpires. They're going to be bad, right, Larry? The umpires are going to be bad. He can't control the weather, because I can guarantee you one thing in Cleveland, it will be bad, He can't control the field, whether the ball is going to hit a pebble. He may not be able to control whether his kids are sick at home, and that's creating problems with his wife. But you know what? There are hundreds of other things he can control. He can control when he gets out of his car how he talks to the parking lot attendant. He can control when he walks down the hall how he talks to the custodian. Even more important, when he gets in the locker room, he can control what kind of teammate he is. Maybe most important to me. He can control how he watches video, how he goes to the training room, prepares for the game. He can control when he goes to the weight room, and he can control how purposeful his batting practice is. So in a day, there are hundreds of things that a player can control. Those things define whether he's a dependable, reliable player. They define whether he's controlling the controllable. And so what I took away from Pat has been an underlying set of attributes and traits that we look for when we hire people outside of the field or when we look at players on the field. But even more, if I had to think about one thing, if you were to say to me, Mark, is there one thing that's the biggest separator, that's the largest differentiator of people that achieve high performance in every industry, or especially in players that you've seen in your career in 25 years, if you could say one thing that that set people apart, that establish happy, successful, fulfilled lives, regardless of field, what would that be? I think I could honestly say that there is one thing. It's how people respond to adversity. Challenges, setbacks, someone else's failure, how do you respond to those things? Do you look at those things as having a weakness exposed, something you want to stay away from and avoid? Or do you look at those things as, okay, that's a challenge I'm going to undertake to grow, to develop, to learn, to improve? That single differentiator for me is the first question I ask and the last question I ask every single time we look at a personnel decision, regardless of area. It's the biggest separator. People who sustain success are resilient. They face challenges regardless of outcome with the understanding and the reality that they will get better. They will find a way from that experience to get better. They're tough. Toughness is an overused word. It gets abused and overused in our society. Toughness is not about fighting physically. It's not about playing hurt in my game. It's about handling adversity. It's about believing with resolve, with determination. It's about showing grit. It's about bowing up to a challenge and saying, I will find a way to make this a positive experience. It's having that positive mindset instead of, believing that a failure exposes your weakness and it's something you want to stay away from. Let me give you one concrete example from one player, and I only say this, I've been exposed to hundreds of great players and hundreds of great examples of grit and resilience and determination, but there's one that's fresh in my mind and one that's so appropriate that I'm going to tell you a story about him today as an example of this. There's a player named Michael Brantley. How many baseball fans? Anybody know who Michael Brantley is? There's a few. So Michael Brantley's a 27-year-old outfielder with our team. He is son of a major leaguer. He embodies a lot of the attributes that I've talked about already. Baseball is important to him. It's meaningful to him. He loves it. He takes pride in it. He's incredibly consistent and committed to the process and practice. He wants to get better every single day, and he's committed to those things. He's a dependable, reliable guy. And obviously, he's got talent as well. So all those things combined to make us feel like about a year ago, we signed him to about a $25 million contract. We said, this guy's a good bet. We believe in him as a player. He's got talent aligned with all those traits and attributes and characteristics. And last spring, as we were doing that multi-year deal, he went out and had the best spring training of anyone in camp. Now, it doesn't always mean very much, but he also got off to a great start. So, big contract, great start in spring training, great start to the season. Hey, things are good. And we headed west for a West Coast swing, 6 games on the West Coast against the Giants and the Angels, and we lost all 6 games. So that immediately creates some pressure, some tension around the team, even when you have Terry Francona as your manager and even if you believe in the talent in the team. And Michael had a bad road trip, but he didn't just have a bad road trip. He didn't get a hit. So 6 games, no wins, no hits. Now that can have different effects on different people. A lot of guys, they feel the pressure, they start trying to do things differently, they start hurting, and 6 games becomes 16 games, becomes a bad month, becomes a bad season. And you can say, hey, I've got my contract, I'll start fresh next year. It can snowball on a lot of guys, on some weaker people. But Michael's not that kind of guy. Michael is tough, Michael is determined, and Michael is a man of character. And he would refuse to give in to it. And when they came back, they take a red-eye flight home from a road trip. He came back, and the team landed at 7 in the morning on the Thursday after the last game. And the next day, Friday, we opened a game at the ballpark. And that Friday, I was walking down underneath the ballpark at 10 a.m. And I walked by the batting cages, and I heard, for anyone that loves baseball, that beautiful rhythmic sound, just crack, crack, crack. Someone hitting in the cages, 10 a.m. Day before a night game. Nobody's around, trust me. There's not a major league player in sight at 10 a.m. before a 7 p.m. game. So I figured, hey, maybe it's one of the coaches and his sons. My son's about that age, and he knows all those guys. Maybe I'll go see. Maybe they're hitting in the cage and say hello. And I walked in the batting cage, and I looked in, and there, alone, with a batting tee and a bucket of balls, was Michael Brantley, focusing on his swing. Thinking about where his hands were, where his plant foot is, where his timing was off, thinking about those at-bats on the West Coast, thinking about one thing: how do I get better? How do I use that experience? I'm not going to lay in bed. I'm not going to make excuses, because you know what? There probably were legitimate excuses he could have made. He could have talked about time zone changes and hydration and bad umpiring, and the guy behind him in the lineup that usually protected him was hurt. He could have come up with a million things. He could have said, he could have sat there wondering in bed, I wonder if it's going to continue. But instead, he wasn't making excuses. He wasn't thinking about the bad things that could happen. He was focusing on process. He was focusing on approach, on the things he could control, and he was committed to find a way. So not every story is this neat and ends this cleanly, but later that night, we got back, 6-game, losing streak, and Michael had 3 hits. He had 3 RBI, and he had a home run. And as his home run, cleared the fence and fans were going crazy, my thought was not on that home run. It was not on the fact that we were going to finally win a game in 7 games. It was on him, 10 a.m. in the batting cage. It was on his perseverance, his determination, his belief that he would find a way to use that slump to get better, that he would not give in, that he would bow up and he would show his character, and that he would make sure everybody knew that he was going to not only not have an extended slump, but he was going to have a great season. Again, not every story ends as cleanly, and not every person gets that kind of feedback, but what happened the rest of the year for Michael? American League All-Star, 3rd in the MVP balloting, behind Mike Trout and Victor Martinez. That's it. So Michael embodies not only the talent that warranted the opportunity that he had in Major League Baseball, but even more, Michael embodies the approach. And when I think about Michael Brantley, I think those are the attributes and traits that when good players become great players are present. When good teams become great teams, when businesses prosper, and when championships are won. That's the kind of player I want to watch play. That's the kind of player I want in our uniform, not because of his talent, but because of his mindset, because of his approach, because of his toughness and his character. So I leave you with this today. Whether we're considering a final hiring decision for an executive, or whether we're discussing a draft pick or a trade or any other player acquisition, the one question that I'm always going to ask before we get down to making that decision is, tell me about how that person handled adversity. Tell me about a situation when that person faced real adversity. That's it. Setbacks, challenges, adversity, how do you handle it? Can you look at those as moments and opportunities to learn, to develop, and improve? That's the true demarcation of character. People who succeed, who find fulfilling, have happy lives, they don't make excuses. Instead of spending energy on those excuses or offering them, even valid ones, they spend time using the challenge to grow, to develop, and to chart a new strategy or plan. They take accountability and ownership of the process. So along your journey, the results are not going to be as clean as baseball stats or wins and losses. You're not going to get the same instant feedback that Michael Brantley got that Friday night after being in the batting cages. Sometimes it'll take the perseverance and determination to work for months or weeks at something before you overcome it. But I would say respond to your challenges the same way Michael did. Because the real separator, in my experience, is the demonstration of character, toughness, and resilience in the face of adversity. Whether it's him alone in the batting cage at 10 a.m., whether it's a group of people in our front office trying to overcome huge objective challenges to win a world championship, or whether it's the course that you've got to take as you balance career and sports and how do you pay for education and all those kinds of things. The difference maker, the separator, will be to have a positive mindset. Be someone who looks at each experience as an opportunity, regardless of outcome, to develop, to improve, and to get better. Thank you.